Is Meganal, thank you for joining this conversation. We are immensely proud of your contributions, not just to Bangalore, but and not just to Karnataka, but across India, because you've been one of the foremost urban foresters India has had, and most of Bangalore's greenery owes you a big debt. So we are really grateful that despite all the news about the pandemic, you have been holding your fort and joining us through Zoom, unfortunately, because of the conditions that we are in. But let me get ahead and ask you a few questions. So when you thought of Bangalore in the 1980s, when you greened it, what was your vision for the city?
I was brought here in 1982, special to green the Bengaluru city as per the directions of the Chief Minister Gundu Rao then. Those times, the trees were not at all so prominently engraved in the minds of the people. People used to come and just do Vanamoswa and get away after the function. But the people had no idea what value the trees were adding to the city. So, when Gundu said that the city should be made green within the shortest time, the government brought me here to green it. I came here in 1982 and was here till 1987. 5 years I was here. Then, when I landed at Bangalore, I saw the city was not very much destroyed, although it was not of the earlier natural state of affairs. New buildings are coming up, and roads are being widened, and trees being cut also, and so many of the bunch of the greenery had already disappeared. I landed here at the right time, I should say. If I were to land here later in 1990 or so, I couldn't have done the work which I did between 82 87, because those times I had to prepare the mind of the public also. Of course, Bangaloreans are very tree lovers. They wanted trees here, but there was nobody to guide them. In such things, what happens is we need good leadership. If the leadership is properly given to the public, the work will be wonderful. When I came here, took the ambulation of the city, I came to know what was the reasons that made the BDA and the corporation not to make it so green as they wanted to do. Because they are planting the small size saplings. I found that the saplings of the small size will not get sunlight and air to grow also. And the tree guards they are putting also were of very small size, say about 3 feet or so. The cows and the people and the public and all these people were damaging the plant. If the cows were browsing with the planted saplings, the saplings were not coming up. So I thought I should plant here only 6 feet above plants so that it will not be damaged, number one. And making to 6 feet plants, then I'll be adding 2 years advance life to the plants, so that it will grow up soon and make the Bengaluru city green. So that was the idea. And the tree guards also, which we invented, was of a very rustic type in the sense the 4 poles were there, the chicken mesh, and it was very economical also, just about 23 rupees or so, whereas the BDA people, they were spending 650 rupees on the RCCT cars. And after doing all these things, I had to prepare the nurseries because there was a nursery stock at all. So I had to establish new nurseries throughout the city so that there should be sufficient plants for planting. That was the one of the initial stage thing we thought of doing it. Then I thought unless the public is involved, the scheme project will not be successful, because the public should take interest, because all 24 hours we can't be, and my lifted staff can't be standing below all the saplings to guard them and all that. So it was necessary to have the public also involved in this great project. For that, I contacted all the citizens of the city and requested them, see here, I'm going to make your street green by planting trees. So tomorrow morning I'm coming here with my staff and plants and everything ready, and the pits will be kept ready also. You people have to, what to do is you have to just come and plant some saplings so that one by one, okay, you can, and that because your involvement in that planting will make you interested in protecting the trees also. That's how I made this project very successful. Second thing what I did is I appointed tree wardens so that they can take care of the plants, and throughout the city also I had planted about 350 tree wardens, and we used to have every monthly, we have having a monthly meetings at the Aranya Bhavan conference hall, where we are having feedback. I wanted to know what they had done, and I wanted to tell them what we are doing also. So it was a very, the communication, the tree wardens were the communicators between the public and me also. Then some of them they just told me, sir, what is happening is to get, we are interested in planting saplings in our courtyards or behind our the houses also. But plants are so far off, available only at Aranyaban. We cannot come to your Aranyaban to pick up the saplings because distance will be more and all that. I said, all right, I will open tree banks everywhere throughout the city. You will have tree banks when at Korabangala and Indranagar and Vijayanagar, Mahalakshmipuram, everywhere. I opened the tree banks so that the people, the public can go on their holidays like Sundays and pick up saplings of their choice, any choice, anything like that. I used to, that's how I made it popular. Then I know the school students, it was very important because unless the younger generation interested in a tree conservation planting, it will not be successful. So I used to visit all the colleges, schools also, request the headmasters to participate in tree planting also. So that's how I made it successful. And many people used to say, sir, we want to, because of the interest shown by me, and it caught up through the news media, and everyone wanted to plant it. So they said, sir, we are going to plant at Indranagara, so we wanted some saplings. So we can't come to Aranyaban and take it. I said, don't worry, I'll send it on my own. So I sent lorry loads of saplings to them so that I can plant there, and it was very helpful for them also. Without taking any transport cost, anything of that sort, we used to supply to them so that they can go and plant at their functions. Then I know the chief minister also and the forest minister also, all of them were interested. I made them say, let us have one day, we shall, throughout Bengaluru city, we shall plant saplings. So all of you, please come and help me. Then the chief minister Ramkrish Hekde was there, and the forest minister, all of them, they came, and we had a big function on that day, and we planted so many saplings. All the students had come, everybody, citizens had come, the newspaper, media people had come, everybody. And that day when we were planting at that Basangudi area in that playground, throughout Bengaluru city, also other places also had kept saplings ready for planting at other places by the students and all that. That's how we made it successful. Because the scheme was so successful, the central government officers and central government ministers used to come and see our planting. They used to go and tell other states, why not you do the thing which is being done at Bangalore? So they went on saying, let us have planting. So our planting fever spread to other cities also, other states also. They took the idea and started planting everywhere. And used to send the saplings to other states also. If they wanted also, if they can come and take it from here, there was no problem also. It so happened that New Delhi, at the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi's Samadhi, there were so barren. no plants at all. So the Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi told the horticultural officer in New Delhi, go and get the plants. And the poor horticultural officer went on searching for the plants throughout India, could not get, ultimately landed here. I gave him saplings, suitable saplings for him, tall saplings, which he took them in wagon loads to New Delhi and planted there. So if you go to New Delhi, if you visit the Samadhi, you'll find that trees are from Bangalore. We should be very proud of it. Then what happened? Seeing all this.
Yeah, so Bhargavi, I think we'll take the other part towards the end of this webinar.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, so I think the message from Neginhal has clearly laid out what is so important to green a city and now to re-green the city. So unless public are involved, he says it is not going to be possible. And the importance of tree wardens and the easy availability of saplings, which he did by establishing tree banks. So in that context, I think we will go back to the couple of questions we've asked him and show it to you later. But now I would like our speaker, Pradeep Krishan, to speak, especially in the context of the book that he has written called Trees of Delhi. And this is also very important for many of us who study botany, who go around identifying trees, collecting samples, making herbariums. And after that, it is kind of forgotten. And I've not read this book, but I've heard that it is more like a guide to those of us who want to regreen the city, because you learn about the city trees in a very different way. So over to you, Pradeep.
Thank you. I'm just going to say a little bit about what I learned about how New Delhi or Lutyens Delhi was actually planted up, because I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from what they did and what happened and what should have happened and what didn't happen. Basically, when they decided to make New Delhi in 1911 as the new capital of India, they formed what's called an Imperial Capital Committee. And 3 people, including Lutyens, were on the committee. And they sat down to decide how to plant up the new city when the avenues came up. And I'm trying to shorten it so that it's, I can talk about it in a short span of time. Essentially, they thought of 8 species of trees for what were going to be about 40 avenues. Seems like a very small number of trees. But the basis on which they chose these trees in the first Capital Committee, Imperial Capital Committee report of 1912, they said, we want trees to be of the right size to frame architectural features that can be seen at the ends of some of the avenues. So they identified these 8 trees by talking to horticulturists and essentially saying that, how tall is this tree going to grow? What is its width going to be? And they also decided not to plant some of the trees that were the most common trees that the Mughals planted. Trees like the mango or the shisham or the banyan, they were just ignored them completely. Now, it's very interesting to look at the choice of species, because these 8 species then expanded to about 13 species. And there were arguments that are recorded in the archives. And I looked at some of these arguments because I wanted to see what were the kind of criteria that they were using to choose their trees. And one of the key criteria was evergreenness. They didn't want to have trees that were going to shed their leaves and be bare in the dry season. Now, if you think about it, Delhi is, in northern India, where we have basically 2 months of rain, sometimes less than 2 months of rain. So for 10 months of the year, this is a city that has almost no rain whatsoever. And the way that a tree adapts to these kinds of ecological conditions is to drop its leaves during the dry season, which begins roughly in December or January, where it's been several months from the last great part of the rainy season. And it's only by becoming dormant and shutting down all its metabolic functions that a tree is able to actually weather this dry period before it comes into leaf again. So to actually identify evergreenness as a desirable characteristic of the trees that they wanted to plant, they were in effect choosing trees that were not actually adapted to growing in Delhi. So, for example, the jamun was one of the favorite trees that they chose. Now, the jamun, if anybody has gone to a dry deciduous forest anywhere in central India or even near Bangalore and in northwest India, the jamun grows along perennial streams where there's constant moisture, right? It's a riparian tree, it's a moisture-loving tree. And to see a jamun in a dry forest and say, here's an evergreen tree, let's take it to Delhi, is to my mind to make a very fundamental ecological mistake. And this mistake was repeated again and again with several of the species that they chose. For example, they chose something called Albizia procera, the white cirrus. And the white cirrus is a tree that grows in swamps, in swampy land, in the dunes, for example, at the base of the Himalaya, sub-Himalayan tract. And because it lives in swamps, it's able to be evergreen. But you bring it to Delhi and for 8 months, it has no leaves at all. So this is a very striking aspect of what was happening. People are choosing trees because of their form or their size or their flowers, or because they're not common, but they're not really looking at the ecology, the ecological conditions that trees need. Now, I just want to point out one very striking fact. India has something like 2,600 species of native trees. That's a huge number. The whole of the UK has 37. The entire United States has about 1,500, much bigger than us in terms of size. The whole of Europe has about 1,200 trees. China has more, Indonesia has more, the Amazon basin has more, but 2,600 native trees is a massive amount of, wonderful native flora. Do you know how many we actually use? On our streets and in our parks and gardens, not counting the sort of ikka-dukki trees that are planted by nutters like me, we probably deal with something like 130 or 140 species of trees. And out of them, roughly half are exotic. So out of 2,600 species of native trees in India, we actually plant and use roughly 60 or 70, maybe 80 species of trees. That's a little over 2% of our natural tree wealth. Now, I'm going to leave you with this thought, and we can come back to this because I have lots more to say, but I'm not sure whether we have time. But this to me is the fundamental issue that we need to address, that unless your trees are appropriate to the particular ecological conditions that they're planted in. For example, Delhi is thought of, Delhi is not just one ecology. Delhi is at least 4 separate microhabitats. What will grow on the stony, thin soil ridge, is very different from what will grow in Lodi gardens, where it's, you've got deep soil and sweet water close to the surface. So you actually have to think specifically of looking at your cities as mosaics of ecological microhabitats, and then to think of trees that are that are perfectly adapted to growing in these places. Because otherwise, you're going to have thirsty trees, you're going to have to give extra nutrients to, you're going to have to, and water is going to be our biggest problem in the country. There are places like California now where by law, there are huge restrictions on what you can plant. Planting, transpiration rates are measured. Landscaping laws and landscaping permissions are only given if you actually stay within certain water budgets. This is something we all have to do. I'm going to stop here, but we can come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pradeep. I think you raised some very important points, especially in the context of the mistake we make everywhere in choosing the right species of trees, putting those that love moisture in drier areas and those that are probably very big in streets, and eventually we land cutting them up, especially in contexts like Bangalore, where we have amazing, massive American rain trees, the Samania Saman, And today, with all the road widening, we are bringing them down. And also many of the ring road trees which are currently proposed to be felled are the tamarind and other big trees, banyan and the others. And also what is fascinating about what you said is the 2% of trees that we actually use in our cities and elsewhere for, greening our spaces out of the 2,600 species of tree species that we have in India. So I think it'll be great to come back to this in the question answer session. But I would now love Suprabha to come in and share her thoughts, because she is somebody who's been walking since the day the lockdown started. One, to be with the migrant laborers, the way they all walk back home, and also to be off fossil fuels. And it was a time that she spent understanding the trees of the city wherever she walked, and she has kind of gathered so much data and information just through her observations. So it'll be fascinating to hear Suprabha. So over to you, Suprabha.
Thank you, Bhargavi. So I have, like everybody, I have walked all my life. I sort of came into something new during this lockdown, which is to really consider my own two legs as my sole mode of transport. I live in a forest and I walk a lot. And since my teen years in Bangalore, walking has been such a pleasure and a joy and a way of, it's really to connect with the neighbors and with the land and so on, taking children on outings. But this period of 3.5, 4 months in Bangalore, where I have had no choice really to be here, I thought, let me test myself. And here are all these people who also choicelessly are walking hundreds of kilometers to get back to their homes. How long can I last? Not in the sense of, day in and day out, every morning to night kind of walking, but that I do everything that I need without using any public transport, without using my Jeep, without using a cycle, but just to rediscover what it means to be a biped. So this was a tremendously, I would say, revelatory exercise, because you start to actually, after about 30 days, after 45 days, after 60 days, now it's 130 days that I have actually not been into a vehicle, on a vehicle, that you actually start to pace yourself very differently. And I wasn't really doing it for exercise. I was doing it to, out of necessity, and to discover how I could actually get around the city, what I needed to do, where I needed to go, all on my two legs. So the pictures you're seeing are of the place where I live, and so my work is in conservation. But the city itself, I have never really explored it, never explored Bangalore in this way. What I would like to just do right now is maybe to read a couple of excerpts from my journal. I kept a journal for pretty much a month on Facebook, and then I've kept some jottings otherwise. But on the 57th day on two legs and counting, which was my challenge for a motor fast, I wrote this. Walked 7 kilometers yesterday on different errands, mostly visiting trees I've known or walked by since I was in my teens. I'm trying to collect memories of the trees and also other plants and climbers and street dogs and so on of this area. And when I go to sleep at night, I try to remember them, especially specific trees and their shapes and limbs and where they grow and burls and knots and the canopy and so on. It's a wonderful thing to do, to feed my dreams with these images from the walks I take. I also worry about the digital culture. Though I do take pictures sometimes, it's usually to tell a story. I prefer, however, this remembering, which is really to reflesh oneself. For member, the word member comes from mims, which comes from mamsam, which means flesh. In other words, to remember is to bring the world into one's body. And to be a member is to be a flesh of a larger body. And so by walking, I declare my membership in the body of the world, which is right now a little part of southern Bangalore, of the world that I walk in. So I declare myself to be part of its flesh. So to dismember, of course, is the opposite, to take apart limb by limb. And the automobile culture, the technocratic culture that we live in, specializes in taking us apart and then putting us back together again. So these were the kinds of thoughts that I had, you know, as I sort of got back into this neighborhood that I've grown up in. And then on another day, I walked 5.7 kilometers to meet Leo and Bhargavi at the ESG office. And I walked 5.7 kilometers back, although Leo offered to drop me. I took a long time getting there because I stopped by different trees. And I stopped many times to peer into little patches where seedlings of trees and other plants were just germinating after the last rains, and strips of verge where edible plants were growing. So I began to see the city in terms of its edible potential, in terms of its beauty, its native trees, its gullies, and so on. You know, so I saw amaranth and solanum and costus and colocasia and so many herbs. I also stopped in shady avenues to talk with friends by phone while hanging out on the curb. And I stopped, of course, to drink tender coconut water and eat tati nungu, ice apple or palmyra fruit. I stopped to admire feisty, handsome dogs who were putting up quite a show. I hung around a little with folks wandering on the street at safe distance who were homeless or migrating. So this exploration I would heartily recommend, because the city is not seen really anymore as a dwelling place where we come home to neighborhoods, where we walk around our houses and apartment blocks, where we get to know just what's in our vicinity. Usually people drive out and they drive very far to come to places of beauty, of natural beauty. But what if, you know, the little housing plots which are lying vacant, I started to see ferns were taking root in them, you know. What if gangs of neighborhood kids started to explore these urban lots and keep records and rewild them and take part in rewilding them? If I could do it, you know, at this age, surely nature clubs and schools and apartment associations could really take interest in just the location where they are. And there's such an immense diversity of beings wherever you are. So that's kind of what I wanted to say. You know, I did keep a record. It's not that I collected a lot of data, but I collected observations of human beings and vendors, of games being played, of animals and birds, lots and lots of little observations. The important thing is that I discovered that, you know, by 50 days, 60 days, I was a very efficient walker. I've always been a good, strong walker, but I was becoming efficient, and I could cover long distances without getting tired. I could carry quite a lot without, you know, feeling it a burden. I could look forward to taking new adventurous turns, you know, places where I had not been, and stop to meet dogs or cows or, you know, people. And now I feel, for the first time in my life, that I have known Bangalore city, that I could really, I'm part of this place. And I think, you know, as mammals, as biological beings, we are actually naturally part of every place that we are. You know, that is the nature of being a body. But somehow life in the city separates us ecologically, and, you know, our waste goes far, our, you know, everything that defecate and urinate, it goes far into, you know, pipes and rivers and so on. So what would it be like to have little vegetable plots and rewilded areas and small lanes where you walked on little paths instead of big roads with lots of traffic, and people come to know each other and to participate together in caring for this place, because this is home after all. You know, why do we want to go and care for other places when we can care for this patch of the world, of the biosphere? So that's what I want to, and I have lots of ideas around that. So someday we can talk about that.
Thank you, Suprabha. And it was so interesting listening to your journey by foot all around the city. And
oh, Bhargavi, sorry, I've walked now something like 700 kilometers. I forgot to mention.
Oh wow! I think it's so inspiring that I'm sure many of us will probably start with at least a 2-kilometer walk every day. But there are many interesting things that you said about remembering trees, which is so true, because I remember walking to my primary school, and I spent more than school. I remember the trees under which I picked up leaves, put them in my books. And Pradeep spoke about the jamun trees. The jamun trees were on the road to my school. I don't know who planted them there, but I remember sitting down and collecting the fruits which not got squashed. And it's so important to be able to remember and recall. And I loved your explanation of the entire thing around remembering. And yes, it is so important to have native fruits, native trees and edible fruits in a time like this, where on one side we talk about labor issues, we talk about malnutrition. If only all our avenue trees were indigenous trees, and which gave some fruits or some leaves, or those kind of things which can be reused, which can be used right here and also provide labor. These are very interesting things to kind of discuss further. Then, of course, yes, it is so important to have street vendors for a tender coconut or a peanut. And what is very striking about what you said is the fact that, yes, we no longer just are connected to the nature around us, which is really a very sad thing. A few years back, a nephew of mine came and said, I want to write an essay on the birds that are in the red list, and can you help me out? I'm like, look out of your tree and write about the bird that you see outside your window. Why do you have to think about the red list and the IUCN and all that? And I'm also reminded of another exercise we did through EST, again, many years ago when Bangalore was seeing road widening. These bunch of kids, we spoke to them about everything that was happening with road widening. And our colleague and friend Vijay Narnapatti took these kids all around Jayanagar. He brought them back and he said, now that you've seen these roads, can you imagine a road with everything we have discussed about, and draw your road? And those sketches of the roads were fascinating, because every child had something new in it. Children drew aquariums along the road, they drew trees, they drew so many interesting things. We were just thinking, if only our urban planners could learn from these kids, our roads will be much more habitable, they'll be easy to walk without all the other hurdles that we face today. So talking about hurdles and walking around the city, I think we should bring in Cyprien now, because cycling today in cities like Bangalore has become a death wish. It is insane to be able to even think of cycling. But despite that, we have a lot of friends in Bangalore and colleagues in Bangalore who are very strongly promoting cycling, and they've been working with the various departments like the Department of Urban Land Transport. And we did have a small neighborhood in Bangalore where we did bring in cycling infrastructure in terms of drawing cycling paths around a small neighborhood. but it was just a very small area where we tried that. And of course, it faced a lot of problems because at the end of the day, the cycling track was just next to the sidewalks or the footpath, and it landed up being parking spaces for cars. So we really did not use those cycling tracks. And we do have a bunch of people who are constantly cycling and who've been promoting it, who've been talking about it, campaigning around it. And it'll be wonderful to hear from Cyprine, her efforts and her experiences in the context of, regreening the city, and in the larger context of, public transport, bus and cycling and non-motorized transport. Yes, over to you, Cyprine.
Okay. Thank you so much. Well, I'm going to speak on more general terms as far as non-motorized transport is concerned. I'm not going to limit it just to cycling, but I wanted to talk about the role urban planners play in making a city walkable and bicycle friendly, or even friendly to public transport users. And my experience as an urban planner in Kenya, the one thing that we were not taught, that one thing that was not in our urban planning syllabus is how to design cities and make them friendly for pedestrians and cyclists. Most of the things that we were taught were about designing a city to be car-centric. And now that after becoming a cyclist for a few years, I started thinking about the role urban planners play in shaping the character of a city. And I compare this to the relationship an artist has with her paintbrush and her canvas. And an artist who has a paintbrush and a canvas has the power and the capability to decide how their art will look at the end of the day. And it's the same thing as an urban planner. An urban planner has the power and the capability to decide how city residents will interact with their city. How they design the streets is how people will interact with the streets. And as I started reading, I was getting ready for this webinar. I started reading about Bangalore, and as I familiarized myself on the history of Bangalore, I came to see that there were so many similarities between Bangalore and Nairobi. Number one is Nairobi, for example, was designed in the colonial era. It was designed in the premise of neighborhood cities, city with various public spaces, green public spaces all over the city, with lots of greenery along public roads. And fast forward to 2020, with urbanization and influx of rural residents to the urban center, we've had so many of those trees cut down. Nairobi was once called the green city in the sun, but if you come to Nairobi right now, a lot of those trees have been cut down. And I can attribute this to various factors. And one of the factors is weak planning policies. Our policies surrounding green spaces are very loose, and it's made it easy for those public spaces to be grabbed and encroached upon by different people. So much of the public spaces that were demarcated back in the 40s are no longer there. We have them somewhere, but they're being used for other uses other than access for different public relaxation or cycling or walking. The other thing that I can attribute to what we are currently going through, the deforestation, is there's a weak understanding among the general public about the significance of trees in itself. Sometimes you find really nice, green, big, old trees being cut just so that somebody can put up a billboard. And the general public feels too weak to defend or to fight for the trees. So they sit back and just watch as some of these things happen. I had my notes written down. And also there's we currently have master plans that we are using, but again, the master plans are focused mainly on the movement of cars. We have zones in different parts of the city. So one zone is meant for businesses, and then another zone for residential use. So there's a lot of movement that is meant for cars, but we don't really think about the short distances. So cycling and walking are not really factored in when urban planners design cities. But just from my personal experience, when I started cycling, I looked at the city and I wanted to do something different. Hence the reason why I started holding critical mass. So critical mass began back in 2015, and we were just a handful of cyclists, and we were just doing it for fun. But having my experience, having my experience cycling, and I started to feel like I could do more and encourage more people to cycle, because there's this misconception that riding bicycles is something meant for the poor or white people. So it was you're either very rich or you're too poor to afford transport. That's why people didn't cycle. And I wanted to use myself as a woman cycling to show an example to other people that cycling is not necessarily what they think. Cycling is healthy, and cycling is something anybody can do. And as I started cycling, I now got more people to see that it's something that they can do. And today we've been organizing the rides every single month, and we have around 400 to 500 people cycling. And right now with COVID, we've not been able to organize the rides as much as we would have loved to, but we still have various people who cycle. And the other good thing that is happening in the city is the city government has started to appreciate cycling. And now we have bicycle lanes that are being developed within the city. We have several roads that are now being redesigned to incorporate bicycle lanes and footpaths. And that is just one project, but then there's also introduction of various walking and cycling spaces within urban public parks. And there's a lot of things happening in Nairobi, but we still have to go around some policies that don't necessarily advocate for walking and cycling within the city. There's a lot that has to be done, but it's starting to change.
Thank you, Cyprian, for your sharing your experience and telling us what is happening and the importance of this getting a large number of people to campaign, by not just by protesting and rallying, but by actually cycling around and becoming visible in a city, so that decision makers can see this and say, oh yes, we need to put some infrastructure in place. I mean, it's so important. And you also mentioned about how public spaces are disappearing. And I think this is happening in many countries, and organizations are fighting so hard to save these public spaces. And the public spaces are always contested between many parties. And policies, how policies somewhere fail to mention these things, and even when they do mention, it's very tokenistic, so that it just doesn't get implemented. So in this context, I think I will now request our speaker Vanaja to share with us what it takes to be a street vendor in Bangalore, in this place called Gandhi Bazaar. Like I shared before, she's a third generation street vendor, and she's also a member of the town vending committee. It took a lot of effort in India, many years of efforts, to make sure there was a law for street vendors. And today we've reached a stage where there is some hope that things will change. So I will hand over the forum to Vanaja. Vanaja will speak to us in Kannada and I will translate it. Vanaja ಅವರೇ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ನೀವೀಗ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಒಂದು ಅನುಭವನ ನಮ್ಮ ಹತ್ರ ಹಂಚ್ಕೊಂಡ್ರೆ ತುಂಬಾ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿರತ್ತೆ. ಒಂದು ಬೀದಿ ವ್ಯಾಪಾರಿಯಾಗಿ, ಒಂದು ಮಹಿಳೆಯಾಗಿ ಗಾಂಧಿ ಬಜಾರ್ ಮಾರ್ಕೆಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನೀವು ಹೇಗ್ ಮಾರ್ಕೊಂಡ್ ಬಂದಿದ್ದೀರಾ ಮತ್ತೆ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಅನುಭವಗಳೇನು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗತ್ತೆ. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು.
ನಾವು ಗಾಂಧಿ ಬಜಾರಲ್ಲಿ ತುಂಬಾ ನಮ್ದಿನ ಕಾಲದಿಂದ ವ್ಯಾಪಾರ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಬಂದಿದ್ದೀವಿ. ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆ? ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಅಜ್ಜಿ ತಾತನ ಕಾಲದಿಂದ ವ್ಯಾಪಾರ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಬಂದಿದ್ದೀವಿ. ಮತ್ತೆ ನಾವು ಟ್ರಾಫಿಕ್ ತುಂಬಾ ಇರುತ್ತೆ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಲ್ಲಿ. ಹೆವಿ ಟ್ರಾಫಿಕ್ ಇರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಟ್ರಾಫಿಕ್ ಕೂಡ ಜಾಮ್ ಆಗಿ ನಮ್ಮ ವ್ಯಾಪಾರದವ್ರು ಕೂಡ ಕಷ್ಟ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಇರೋರಿಗೆಲ್ಲ ಒಂದೊಂದ್ ಕಾರ್ ಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ ತುಂಬಾ ಕಷ್ಟ. ಕಾರ್ ಇಟ್ಬಿಡಿ ಫ್ಯಾಮಿಲಿನೇ ಅದ್ರಲ್ಲಿ ಓಡಾಡ್ಬೋದಲ್ಲ. ಮನೆಗೆ ಒಂದ್ ಕಾರು, ಮಗನ್ ಒಂದ್ ಕಾರು, ಅಳಿಯನ್ ಒಂದ್ ಕಾರು, ಈ ತರ ಮನೆ ಕಾರ್ ಇದ್ರೆ ಆ ಕಾರೆಲ್ಲ ರೋಡ್ ಬಂದ್ರೆ ಟ್ರಾಫಿಕ್ ಜಾಮ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಅದೇ ಅಲ್ಲ
Bhargavi, I think you are not hearing Vanaja. So can you ask Mr. Brijesh Kumar to speak? We'll just check her Wi-Fi and we'll get back to her. She can follow.
ಓಕೆ, ಶ್ಯೂರ್. ವನಜ ಅವರೇ, ನಿಮ್ ಮಾತಾಡೋದು ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಅದು ಟೆಕ್ನಿಕಲ್ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ ಏನಂತ ಸರಿ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. ಅಷ್ಟೊತ್ತಿಗೆ ನಾನು ಇನ್ನೊಬ್ರು ಕಾಯ್ತಾ ಇದಾರೆ, ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಮಾತಾಡ್ಸ್ಬಿಡ್ತೀನಿ. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು. ಸೊ I will now request Mr. Brijesh Kumar, who's heard all our experiences of all our speakers, of what has happened in other cities and other places, to share your experience as one of the key people who's been in this for a very long time, to share with us what does it take to re-green a city. I know you spent a lot of time a few years back when a committee was set up, the court-appointed committee was set up with the amicus curiae, getting everybody in the city on board to, take samplings and go around ward by ward to plant them, to protect them, take care of them, so on and so forth. So over to you, Mr. Brijesh.
Whatever I say here, I'm a professional forester. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
I'm a professional forester, and I work for the state government. And I was given on loan, or as we call it, deputation here, to the urban local body called BBMP, which is the municipal corporation for Bangalore. For our viewers, some of our viewers may not be familiar with the working of the government here in India or maybe in Karnataka. Urban local body is a separate entity than the government. So as I understand, when I was handed over to the urban local body, I must say that I felt what a minority is. There's no video, so I'm not sure whether I'm audible there. I'm not sure whether I can.
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay. So urban local bodies, especially in India, for that matter, local bodies are considered subordinate to the government. In many ways, they are actually, by laws, as prevails in India, subordinate to the government. So now, in the local body, my duty, my job chart, was to see to it that the city remains green. Now, it was a very tall order. Firstly, on the supply side, I must say, urban local body, that is BBMP in Bangalore, typically pass their budget in the month of September. This budget is valid till the end of the financial year, which is the month of March, sometimes with some leverages, maybe April, first 2 weeks of April. By the time budget is passed, monsoon is over. So we are left high and dry because without any approval, we cannot proceed. By the time approval comes, we are left with hardly any growing season. I vividly remember during 2012, I was new. We did planting. Somehow we managed. 2013, we were alert. We made the proposal well in advance. In the month of April only, we started moving the files. 3 continuous files were returned. We did not plant, not even a single tree, not even a single seedling. In the month of October, when people realized that there will be no planting, I had a very nasty kind of showdown with the general body. I refused to plant because I said, if I plant now, I cannot assure you that the plants will survive. That being so, in that year, there was no planting. Why I am narrating this story is that greening of the city probably doesn't appear anywhere in the priority of urban planning in India, more so in Karnataka. On the other side, I must say we had a lot of problems in the sense I was not as lucky as my esteemed colleague who had just spoken. When we inherited the department in Bangalore, we realized that there have been grown-up trees everywhere. As a manager, I may differ from some of the speakers here on the panel. As a manager, I realized that not every tree is suitable for urban city. It may be very romantic to imagine that all 2,000 and odd endemic species can be planted or should be planted, but there are problems. There are problems. Some of the trees, the leaf fall is so much, people get irritated and they ring them. We cannot keep a guard everywhere behind every tree. Some of the trees, the roots are so pervasive and so robust that the roots start ripping apart the drainage or the road. So we are left with no choice but to cut the trees. I understand that the expectation of people in general is that we must bring forest inside the city, but there are practical problems. For example, not all trees which are suitable to be planted in the urban setting, the nursery techniques of not all trees have been perfected, even as of now. So 60-70 species that we normally plant in the cities or even outside are only the trees or the species for which we have perfected the art of growing seedlings in the nursery. So this is one limitation that we have. And I must admit here now that in 80s and 90s, when we had taken up massive planting in Bangalore, at Bangalore city, we did not realize which species is suitable and which species is not. The moderator quoted an example of Samanya Saman, that is the rain tree. My experience as a manager is that that tree needs the maximum request that come for felling of avenue trees is Samanya Saman only, because they grow so big and so voluminous that with every rain they fall, and these trees encroach part of the road, drainage, and they are hazard to the neighboring buildings. So expectation is perfectly okay. We, as a public servant, it is our duty to keep the expectation alive and try to fulfill as much as possible. But as a manager, we realize that not everything that a user expects cannot be translated into action. This is all that I have to say in introduction. I would love to have questions because then you can get more out of me. So I stop at that. Let us see.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Brijesh. Yes, I completely understand your challenge of, the requests that come for Samanya Saman and Gulmohar. Gulmohar especially has been catching a lot of infection and branches just fall off. I had a battle with my own father because he wanted a Gulmohar opposite his house to be chopped off. So I completely understand. But it would have been good if we had found a way to save these heritage trees in the core city area, because these had been planted, many, many years ago. But of course, yes, many of us who grew up in Bangalore have these amazing memories of these huge canopies in the heart of the city, especially in and around Cubbon Park, Sheshadri Road, and all those roads where we lost those trees. So yes, it'll be wonderful to hear more about from the whole regreening of cities, and your point of the whole planning exercise and the budgets not getting approved on time is so crucial for this entire project if we really want to see it moving. I think that will definitely need a little bit more discussion, and I'm sure our participants will have questions around that. So we'll go back to Vanaja and see if the technical part has been fixed and if she can share her experiences now. So I basically have asked her to share her experiences of being in Gandhi Bazaar and sitting under the tree. So initially she started off saying that she has been vending there from 3 generations. Her grandparents started it, and all 3 generations have been vending under the same tree. And the current challenges that are faced there are too much traffic. And because there is too much traffic, there is a traffic jam. And it is a major problem to street vendors. And she had begun explaining about how today in every family, there are 4 cars. The father, mother, children, everybody has a car, and all the cars flood the street. And that's when the internet broke, perhaps. So we'll go back to Vanaja and hear her more. Vanaja ಅವರೇ?
ಹೇಳಿ ಮೇಡಮ್.
ಕೇಳ್ಸತ್ತಾ? ನೀವು ಅವಾಗ್ಲೇ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ಲೇನ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದನ್ನ ನಾನು ಹೇಳ್ದೆ. ಅಲ್ಲಿಂದ ಕಂಟಿನ್ಯೂ ಮಾಡಿ. ನೀವ್ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರಿ ಒಂದೊಂದ್ ಸಂಸಾರದಲ್ಲಿ ಈಗ 4-5 ಕಾರ್ಗಳು ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡಿರ್ತಾರೆ, ಅದರಿಂದ ಟ್ರಾಫಿಕ್ ಜಾಮ್ ಆಗತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ. ಸೊ ಅಲ್ಲಿಂದ ಮುಂದೆ ಹೇಳ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗಿ ನಾನು ಅನುವಾದ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ.
ಮತ್ತೆ ನಾವು ಚಿಕ್ಕ ಮಕ್ಳೆಲ್ಲ ಇದ್ದಾಗೆಲ್ಲ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಟ್ರಾಫಿಕ್ ಇರ್ಲಿಲ್ಲ ಮೇಡಮ್. ನಾವು ಮರದಡೆಗೆ ಬೆಳೆದವರು. ಮಕ್ಳಿಂದ ನಮ್ ತಾಯಿ ಮುಂದೆ ವ್ಯಾಪಾರ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರೆ ಹಿಂದೆ ನಾವ್ ಆಟ ಆಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ವಿ, ಹೂವು ಕಟ್ತಿದ್ವು. ಎಲ್ಲ ದೊಡ್ಡ ಫ್ಯಾಮಿಲಿ. ಅಕ್ಕಪಕ್ಕದವ್ರು ಕೂಡ ಒಂದು ಮರದಲ್ಲಿ 5-6 ಜನ ಕುತ್ಕೊಂಡು ವ್ಯಾಪಾರ ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ವಿ. ಅವ್ರ ಮಕ್ಳು ನಾವು ಕೂಡ ಎಲ್ಲ ಜೊತೆ ಕುತ್ಕೊಂಡು ಕಟ್ಟಿ ಆಟ ಆಡಿ ನಾವು ಬೆಳ್ಕೊಂಡ್ ಬಂದಿದ್ದು. ಆಗಿನ ಕಾಲದಲ್ಲಿ ಟ್ರಾಫಿಕ್ ಕೂಡ ಕಮ್ಮಿ ಇತ್ತು, ಎಲ್ಲಾ ಕಡೆ ಗಿಡ ಮರಗಳಿತ್ತು, ಕಾಯಿಲೆ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಇರ್ಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಈಗ ಎಲ್ಲಿ ನೋಡಿದ್ರು ಮರ ಕಟ್ ಮಾಡೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಕಾಯಿಲೆ ಕೂಡ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಮತ್ತೆ ನಮ್ ವ್ಯಾಪಾರದವ್ರಿಗೆ ಬಿಸಿಲಿಗೆ ಮರ ಇದ್ರೆ ನೆರಳಾಗಿರುತ್ತೆ. ಮತ್ತೆ ಯಾರಾದ್ರೂ ವಯಸ್ಸಾದವ್ರು ಬಂದು ಕುತ್ಕೊಂಡು ಅಥವಾ 1 ಅರ್ಧ ಗಂಟೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಹತ್ರ ಮಾತಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗೋರು. ಈಗೆಲ್ಲ ಅದಿಲ್ಲ, ಮರಗಳೆಲ್ಲ ಎಲ್ಲಂದ್ರೆ ಕಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಿರ್ತಾರೆ. ಅದರಿಂದ ಮರ ಇರ್ಬೇಕು, ಮತ್ತೆ ಹಸಿರು ಇದ್ರೆ, ಮತ್ತೆ ಟ್ರಾಫಿಕ್ ಕಮ್ಮಿ ಇದ್ರೆ ಬರೋ ಕಸ್ಟಮರ್ ಕೂಡ ಬಂದು ಮೊನ್ನೆ ವ್ಯಾಪಾರ ಆಯ್ತು ಅವಾಗ ಟ್ರಾಫಿಕ್ ಬಂದ್ ಮಾಡಿ ವ್ಯಾಪಾರ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬ್ಯಾರಿಕೇಡ್ ಹಾಕಿದ್ರು, ಮೇಲ್ಗಡೆ ಟಾಗೂರ್ ಸರ್ಕಲ್ ಪಾರ್ಕ್ ಇಂದ ಗಾಂಧಿ ಬಜಾರ್ ಸರ್ಕಲ್ ವರ್ಗು. ಮತ್ತೆ ಜನ ಫ್ರೀಯಾಗಿ ಬಂದು ಅಲ್ಲಲ್ಲೇ ಪಾರ್ಕ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಒಳಗಡೆ ಬಂದು ಏನ್ ಬೇಕೋ ವಸ್ತು ಖರೀದಿ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋದ್ರು. ಆ ತರ ಟ್ರಾಫಿಕ್ ಯಾವಾಗ ಕಮ್ಮಿ ಇತ್ತು, ಬಸ್ಸಲ್ಲೇ ಓಡಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಜನ ತರೋ ಖರ್ಚು ಕಮ್ಮಿ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ, ಮತ್ತೆ ನಮಗ್ ಕಾಯಿಲೆನೂ ಬರಲ್ಲ, ಎಲ್ಲಾ ಅನುಕೂಲ ಕೂಡ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಅದರಿಂದ ಬೀದಿ ವ್ಯಾಪಾರದವ್ರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಒಂದು ಮಳೆ ಬರ್ಲಿ ಬಿಸಿಲು ಬರ್ಲಿ ಮರ ಅನುಕೂಲ ಆಗಿರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಮರ ಇರ್ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ನಾನು ಕೇಳ್ತೀನಿ.
Yeah, so what Vanaja shared is the fact that today, because people are taking cars, there are traffic jams. If only people travel by public transport, she mentioned buses, then the roads will not be clogged, and street vendors like her can have their livelihoods in a much more peaceful way. So she mentioned about how important it is to have trees in the area where there is street vending allowed, because sitting under the sun all day can get very stressful. So when there are trees, it is easier for street vendors to vend under them. And then she was mentioning about how senior citizens, especially, if there is a tree, they'll come very casually, leisurely, sit under the tree, have a little conversation, discuss about what is being sold, and buy all that they want in peace and get back. But because of the, you just saw the picture of Gandhi Bazaar. Gandhi Bazaar has been a market for many, many years. I grew up in the area, so it has some traditional stores where 3 generations in many of our South Bangalore families have been buying there. And you can get practically everything from grocery to clothes to automobile parts and everything. So in a market like that, what she mentioned was how important it is to have pedestrian space, so that people who come there to buy, they don't have to be intimidated by the traffic, because crossing the Gandhi Bazaar road today is a nightmare. And if you can't cross in peace, if you can't walk in peace, it gets very challenging to buy. And when we don't buy, it is the street vendors who suffer, because they don't get the kind of business that they can make a living off. ಬನಜ ಅವರೇ, ಈಗ ರೀಸೆಂಟ್ ಆಗಿ ಗಾಂಧಿ ಬಜಾರ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಬೀದಿ ವ್ಯಾಪಾರಿಗಳನ್ನ ಅಲ್ಲಿಂದ ಓಡಿಸೋದಿಕ್ಕೆ ಟ್ರೈ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು. ಮತ್ತೆ ನೀವೆಲ್ಲ ಸೇರಿ ಪ್ರೊಟೆಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಆ ಒಂದು ಜಾಗನ ಮತ್ತು ಪಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೀರಾ. ಆ ಒಂದು ರ್ಯಾಲಿ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಒಂದ್ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಹೇಳ್ತೀರಾ? ಮತ್ತೆ ಯಾರ್ಯಾರು ಬಂದಿದ್ರು ಆ ಎಂಟೈರ್ ಎಫರ್ಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ? ತುಂಬಾ ಜನ ಸೇರಿದ್ರು. ನಿಮ್ಮ ಕಾರ್ಪೊರೇಟರ್ಸ್ ನ ಕರ್ಸಿದ್ರಿ, ಮಿನಿಸ್ಟರ್ ನ ಕರ್ಸಿದ್ರಿ, ಅದೊಂದ್ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಹಂಚ್ಕೊಂತೀರಾ ನಮ್ಮ ಹತ್ರ?
ಹಾ ಮೇಡಮ್, ನಮ್ಗೆ ಈಗ ಒಂದು 12 ವರ್ಷನೇ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು ಅನ್ಸುತ್ತೆ. 12 ವರ್ಷನೂ 2016 2014 ಮುಂಚೆ, ಅದ 2014 ಹಲೋ 2014 ಆಗಿದ್ದು. ಮತ್ತೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಮ್ಗೆ ನೈಟ್ ಅಂಡ್ ನೈಟೇ ಬಂದು ಎಲ್ಲ JCB ತಂದು ಎಲ್ಲ ಪೂರ್ತಿ ಅಂಗಡಿ ಸಮೇತ ಎಲ್ಲ ತುಂಬ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗಿದ್ರು. BBMP ಇಂದ ತುಂಬ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋದಾಗ BBMP ಇಂದ ಫುಲ್ ತುಂಬ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋದಾಗ ನಾವು ಎಲ್ಲ ನೈಟ್ ಅಂಡ್ ನೈಟ್ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗಿಲ್ಲ, ಬೆಳಗಿನ ಜಾವ ಬಂದು ಮಾಮೂಲಿ ವ್ಯಾಪಾರ ಬರೋ ಸಮಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಆಗ ಅಂಗಡಿಗಳಿರ್ಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಮ್ಮನ್ನ ಕುತ್ಕೊಳಕ್ಕೆ ನಿಂತ್ಕೊಳಕ್ಕೆ ಪೊಲೀಸರು ಬಿಡ್ಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಇದು ನಿಮ್ ಜಾಗ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಹೋಗಿ ಮನೆಗೆ ಅಂದ್ರು. ಆ ಟೈಮಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಬೀದಿಲಿ ಕುತ್ಕೊಂಡು ಬೀದಿ ವ್ಯಾಪಾರಗಳೆಲ್ಲ ಪೂರ್ತಿ ರೋಡಲ್ಲಿ ಕುತ್ಕೊಂಡು ಸ್ಟ್ರೈಕ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕಾರ್ಪೊರೇಟರ್ ಇಂದ ಹಿಡಿದು CM ವರ್ಗೂ ಬಂದಿದ್ರು. ಮತ್ತೆ ಕಾರ್ಪೊರೇಟ್ರು ಅಲ್ಲೇ ನಮ್ಗೆ CM ಆಡಳಿತಮ್ಮ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ತೆಗೆಸ್ತು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು. ಅದಾದ್ಮೇಲೆ ನಾವು ಕಮಿಷನರ್ ಆಫೀಸ್ಗೆ, ಮತ್ತೆ CM ಮನೆಗೆ, ಸಿದ್ದರಾಮಯ್ಯ ಅವ್ರ ಮನೆಗೆ, ಸದಾನಂದ ಗೌಡ್ರ ಮನೆಗೆ, ದೇವೇಗೌಡ್ರ ಮನೆಗೆ ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಂದು ದಿನ ಒಂದೊಂದು ಕಡೆ ಹೋಗಿ, ಮತ್ತೆ ರಕ್ಷಣಾ ವೇದಿಕೆ ಅವರು ಕೂಡ ಬಂದಿದ್ರು. ಮತ್ತೆ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಸಂಘ, ವಿನಯ್ ಸರ್ ಅಂತ ಆಗ್ಲೇ ಕೂಡ ನನಗೆ ಪರಿಚಯ ಆಗಿದ್ದು. ಆಗ ನಮ್ಮನ್ನ ಎತ್ತಂಗಡಿ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಅವರು ಬಂದು ತುಂಬಾ ಸಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು. ಅವ್ರು ಕೂಡ ಸಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ, ಯಾರಾದ್ರೂ ಬಂದೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಡೆಲ್ಲಿಯಿಂದಾನೇ ಆರ್ಡರ್ ಆಗಿದೆ, ನಾವು ಬೀದಿ ವ್ಯಾಪಾರದವ್ರನ್ನ ಎತ್ಸಂಗಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಒಂದು ಲೆಟ್ರ್ ತೋರಿಸಿ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಏನಾರ ತೊಂದರೆ ಕೊಡೋರಿಗೆ ಅಂತ ನಮ್ ಜೊತೆ ನಿಂತು ಸಹಕಾರ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅದೇ ಟೈಮಲ್ಲಿ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಸಂಘದವರು ಕೂಡ ಬಂದು ಸಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. 3 ತಿಂಗಳು ಮೇಡಮ್ ನಾವು ಪೆಂಡಾಲ್ ಅಡನೆ ಕುತ್ಕೊಂಡು ಸ್ಟ್ರೈಕ್ ಮಾಡಿ, ಹೋರಾಟ ಮಾಡಿ, ನಮ್ ಬೀದಿ ವ್ಯಾಪಾರದವರೆಲ್ಲ ಕಾರ್ಪೊರೇಷನ್, ವಿಧಾನಸೌಧ ಎಲ್ಲ, ವಿಧಾನಸೌಧದಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಮೀಟಿಂಗ್ ಆಗಿ ನಮ್ಗ್ ಜಾಗ ಕೊಡೋವರೆಗೂ ನಾವು ಸ್ಟ್ರೈಕ್ ಮಾಡಿದೀವಿ ಮೇಡಮ್. ಊಟ ಇಲ್ದಿರಾ, ನಿದ್ದೆ ಇಲ್ದಿರಾ, ಹತ್ಕೊಂಡ್ ಸುರ್ಕೊಂಡು ವಯಸ್ಸಾದವ್ರನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಕರ್ಕೊಂಡು ನಾವು ಅಲ್ದಾಡಿದೀವಿ. 3 ತಿಂಗಳಾದ್ಮೇಲೆ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಪರ್ಮಿಷನ್ ಸಿಕ್ತು ಮೇಡಮ್. ಅಷ್ಟು ಕಷ್ಟಪಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೀವಿ.
Thank you. Yeah, so what happened was a few years back, 2014-15, she mentioned, when the city municipality decided to remove the street vendors from this area, and without any notice, they brought bulldozers and bulldozed all their temporary structures that they had put up. and they were not allowed to win. One fine morning, everything was gone, and they just couldn't think of sitting there to earn their livelihood. So that's when their movement started. It was a very strong movement of all the street vendors, and many civil society organizations joined hands. They met with the chief minister, the ex-prime minister, and various other ministers, and managed to get this space back. And there's a lot of writing that has happened in this context, and I would urge all of you to read up. There are a lot of related articles and representations even on the ESD website. So street vending is so crucial to a city, and the role of public transport and the role of greenery in the city is very important, because they're all connected with each other. When there are trees, there are people on this road, on the sidewalks, and it becomes celebratory. You can celebrate your city life. You're connected to each other. She also shared about how important it is when these spaces are, they have shade, people tend to interact, and when they interact and discuss, it also influences people to buy many other things which they may not have thought of. Especially in a bazaar like the Gandhi Bazaar. It is a amazing market, because it comes alive every day, and especially during various festivities. It's a fascinating space to study, and studies there, especially with students. And some of these reports are also on the ESD website, and I would urge many of you to read about the student experiences of walking in a market. So when you are understanding a city, it's very important how you read the city. And the minute we try to read the city, the best place to read the city is a market area, because you get to understand its ecology, its culture, its language, the identity, everything you get to understand in that one market. It will give you a slice of the city. So ತುಂಬಾ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು ವನಜಾ ಅವರೇ. ನಮ್ ಜೊತೆ ಇನ್ನ ಇರಿ, ಯಾಕೆಂದ್ರೆ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳು ಬರ್ಬೋದು ನಿಮ್ಗೆ. So with all these thoughts out there, I would now like to open the forum for some question and answers. I'm sure there are already a few questions here. If anybody wishes to ask a question, please do raise your hand and we'll be able to see you. We have some comments here. So Swaminathan says, in my childhood, I had walked a lot to school, friends' houses, markets, because there was hardly any alternative. It did not make any difference, as others were also doing the same thing, but it's become very difficult to walk on roads now. But will individual choices change the mindless scenarios? So I would request both Suprabha and our other speakers, Mr. Brijesh, also to respond to this. Suprabha?
Bhargavi?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't do this as it was a very personal thing to do, but it was something to do about learning about the city. And the moment you learn something, I think you have a follow-up to do. The car culture is definitely very anti-life, and it's destructive, as Vanaja has just said, in so many ways. So the recommendation out of a personal episode of exploration is definitely challenge the car culture. That's all that I would say. It's obviously a dangerous place to walk. And lockdown, I could see the different phases where, where there was nobody on the streets for some time. It was just a few walkers. and then how when the traffic started to come back, and then it full on traffic, how it's become absolutely lethal for people on their feet, and so now we begin the thing. We have to talk about it. We have to talk about how we get our lives back. For people like Vanaja, but also for anyone. You know, why do we send kids out to the forest to learn ecology when we can do it right here? And I would say that we need to do what Supreet has done, which is organize. So whether we organize walkers, and I don't mind being part of something like that, but whether we organize a counter car culture is something more along the lines that would be needed.
Yeah. Thank you, Suprabha. Yes, I think it's very important that many of us start walking, and just like the critical mass, the more we walk, the more visible we are. I think decision makers will, hopefully create infrastructure for that. So it'll be great to hear from Mr. Brijesh on this point.
Some harsh realities, we must touch them first. When we started developing our cities, our urban planning, probably did not have adequate vision that the cities will become so large, or because of other considerations, we did not pay much attention to the rapid urban transport, mass urban transport. Now, I take the example of Bangalore only, and forgive me for saying this simile or analogy. Initially, Bangalore can be considered to be body of a chicken, where arteries are designed to supply blood to a body which is the size of a chicken. Now, suddenly in 20 years, the body has become that of a goat. We cannot go back and change the size of the arteries anymore. So that is the reason why trees have been vanishing from core wards of Bangalore city. Now, since urban transport, I do not blame anybody, but then this is just we have inherited. Since urban transport was not a priority in urban planning, now when we try to take metro, either we go underground, pay huge costs, or we encroach the existing roads and cut trees. So the problem that we face is that the way we have evolved in the cities now, there's no point in crying anymore. Let us salvage the best out of it. That is the only message I wish to say to the people attending this webinar.
Thank you, Mr. Brijesh. There is a question from Vasant Mysore-Mat, and he refers to this whole felling of the 33,000 odd trees on the peripheral road, and he says, it is taken like so many years to grow. So why can't the metro go underground, or why can't this road go underground? And so that we can save the trees for future generations. It will be good to hear from Mr. Brijesh, and also maybe from Mr. Pradeep, from the many experiences in Delhi with big infrastructure projects like this, which has taken away many of the trees in Delhi as well. Yeah, Mr. Brijesh.
Hello. Can I say about it? I'm Vasant Mysore-Mat here.
Sure, Mr.
My point is, Mr. Brijesh, Leo and Bhargavi, it's a good thing you organized a very important webinar like this. Mr. Brijesh, even before you were born or I was born, I'm 76, these trees existed in Bangalore. There was no question of planning at that time. The planning was done by human beings who didn't care about the trees. Now they want all the space in the world. Is it fair on their part? It's not correct. You must know, as an experienced person, a grown-up tree gives oxygen for 134 years to a man if he is alive. Such is the greatness of trees, grown-up trees. maybe, as you have pointed out, the rain trees or gulmohar. Gulmohar is not an endemic species. It is a foreign species. And by and by, there is already a ban on planting gulmohar trees, I think. And we should weed out or space out such bad things, bad species from the center of the city. Okay, agreed. But at the same time, whatever is being planned, crores of rupees are being spent in the name of planting seedlings, saplings, etc. But how many of them are actually living? Just planting is not a big deal. Anybody can do it. But looking at it grow like our children, isn't it their responsibility? That's one thing. Second thing is about pets only. Why can't we have pets only streets like brigades and commercial street? Ban all the traffic, please. Thank you.
Forgive me for being a little different than what you raised the point. Those who are familiar with Bangalore, they may recall that in front of Mantri Mall, some 7 years back, there was an issue of cutting of trees, and the matter went to High Court, and the trees were retained. The trees were retained. The trees are still standing there. I am for trees. My heart and soul is in trees. But having said that, I'm a manager. I need to see what is the best option available. I'm aware that no study has been conducted for the traffic congestion that the trees which were retained in front of Mantri Mall cause. But each time I pass, I realize that every month thousands of liters of diesel and petrol is burnt over and above what is required by the vehicle had these trees not been there. So there is, when we retain trees at odd locations where it is bottlenecking, traffic is bottlenecking, we pay the cost. I may say that, it is costing me only 5 rupees a month to my vehicle. But when you calculate the cumulative cost, it is enormous. So there is no, as there's an old saying, there's no free lunch. If we want to retain a tree against the existing principles of traffic or public convenience, then we are paying a cost. So it is not that by retaining a tree we have won the battle. No, we are paying cost every month, probably every day. With this reason, like a surgeon, I am of the opinion that if an organ has become unproductive or decaying, we must cut it in the larger picture. So same is the case with peripheral ring road. I understand to say 30,000 trees, yes, it sounds very huge, and these trees take decades to grow. But kindly see, if peripheral ring road is not, I'm not saying that the cars are good or bad, but having inherited the individual vehicle culture now, if peripheral ring road is to be made, and if trees are not cut, every day we'll be paying, the society will be paying in terms of trickles of diesel of every vehicle or drops of petrol of every vehicle, which will be burnt extra at each tree where the traffic congestion occurs. So this is, yes, please.
One thing, I'm suggesting go underground. Your opinion?
Sir, to the best of our knowledge,
why I'm saying that is, in busy areas like Chipet and Shivaji Nagar, metro is going underground. That is huge. And for saving our 33,838 trees, if cost is a little more, doesn't matter. but we save trees. And oxygen will be available. And oxygen will be available. And your cars, there is no, one or two people will be traveling in cars. For them, felling off the thousands of trees, it may not, in those peripheral ring roads, no pedestrians will walk.
Sir, I'll try to answer you. Whether you are convinced or not, I cannot really vouch for it.
Okay.
What happens is that to the best of our assessment, we are still a developing country. So we do not have enormous money available to us as a planner, as an executor, for urban planning. In Chickpet and in core areas of Bangalore, the metro has gone underground only because we could not afford, in human cost terms and in monetary terms, displacement of the people where the alignment of metro goes on the surface. That is one. Second thing is that when we, even if I presume that we go underground, the money that we spend, the money that the country spends, the planner, the BBMP or any metro authority, the money that is spent by any authority comes from an economic activity. We may sell something, we may grow food grain, we may export something. That is how the money comes. And the money also has a carbon cost. The money has been earned by spending something there elsewhere, which has a carbon cost. So it is not that when we spend money, we can get rid of the nuisance to the environment. We are only shifting the nuisance from Bangalore to maybe Madhya Pradesh or to Arunachal. So spending money sounds very good, but then we are paying the cost in Arunachal or Madhya Pradesh and saving Bangalore. So this is that I can share with you. I do not know whether this is fully convincing or not, but this is one of the reasons: money and the cost. I also say, yes, please. You wanted to say something, please.
I think there are a couple of other questions as well to wait, so we'll definitely get back to you. I would now request Pradeep to share his thoughts both on the fact of the individual choices, the scenarios, and the kind of infrastructure that is being pushed, urban infrastructure in our cities. And Delhi has seen a lot of conflicts, so it'll be wonderful to hear from you from the Delhi context as well.
Yeah, well, from the Delhi perspective, I think we have some lessons to teach you. One is that we have gone so overboard with cars. We have more cars than I think 4 of the other metros put together. And we're heading fast towards gridlock. And I think it's important to realize that planning, the way planning is done in this country and has been done for the last 50 or 60 years is what is known as trend-based planning. You assess a trend. So supposing you're looking at transport needs or at housing or at drinking water availability, you look at the previous 10 years and you project it into the future for 15 years. And you say, well, what is the likelihood of our, needing so many million liters or so many million miles of, roads 15 years in the future? This is not how the rest of the world plans at all. Today, planning is a work of imagination. Planning is about identifying desirable outcomes for every single sector and seeing how you can realize those outcomes by doing the right things. So when Mr. Brijesh Kumar says that I'm not against cars or for cars, it's very important that we are against cars, because cars are showing us exactly what is totally wrong with the way our urban centers are developing today. So it's very important that we make value judgments about what's happening to our cities. The other important lesson I think that Delhi has for everybody, two lessons. One is that we're going to lose all our water. Gurgaon is slated to go completely dry in about 15 years. What the catastrophic effect of that on millions of people is going to be just amazing. And there are no plans except for diverting more rivers from the Himalaya to try and feed an urban agglomeration like that. It's absolutely scandalous and shocking. And the third is that we have shown absolutely no ability to stop the large-scale destruction of trees because no value is placed on trees. If there was a temple in the way or a mosque in the way, the road would have actually gone around or the metro would have found another way there. But because the tree is not valued, they say, "Take a cart loose." So those are the three most important lessons that Delhi has for Bangalore.
Thank you. Thank you, Pradeep, for that. There is a question from Brinda Shastri, and she says, what is your opinion on the Bengaluru International Airport acquiring or importing Mediterranean flora, dragon trees between 80 to 100 years old? Is this sustainable? So probably both Pradeep and Suprabha and Brijesh, all three of you can answer that.
So, it's I find it very amusing, but it's also very worrying that the current trend with landscape architects in India is that they want to ape what is happening in Dubai and Sharjah. They look at those landscapes there that have typically been done by American landscape architects who set up big irrigation schemes and drip irrigation schemes and grow palms. And this has become the big vogue with landscape architects in India. I find it absolutely shocking, that for inspiration, we look at a little desert kingdom in the Middle East and say, hum bhi aise plant karenge. I find that repulsive, quite frankly. And ultimately, I think when we audit our landscaping, because look, how we plant is going to have a direct effect on how much water is actually drawn from the ground, right? And unless we actually address that issue, we're going to get into very, very deep trouble.
Thank you. Suprabha and then Brijesh.
Well, I haven't been to Bangalore airport in ages, and this is absolutely ghastly to hear this. I'm thinking that it's, this is one airport and possibly there's so many other places that are doing the same thing, and those, the wild wherever in the Mediterranean stands very little chance of surviving if airports are, transplanting old plants. So this is, around the world, you go to an airport or a mall, it's just the same. It's got, what is the quality or the character or the culture or the reflection of the place where it's at? And why do we want Mediterranean trees and then talk about Bengaluru and the culture of this place? It's just, it doesn't make sense to me. It has no, it's not coherent somehow.
Yeah. And Brijesh, I know even in Church Street, we've planted with all the Church Street doing of the Church Street, we have palm trees out there. So maybe you should share your thoughts.
Yes, please. Availability of money shouldn't dictate what we should do and what we should not. Bangalore BIAL may be having some resources allocated for landscaping. That doesn't mean that, as Mr. Krishan said very correctly, very aptly, that doesn't mean that we can do whatever we wish to. I do not know, because I'm only privy to the news through newspaper. I'm not sure whether the trees are ecologically adjusting to the climate of Bangalore or not. I'm not very sure. And even if they were, I don't think there is a place of those kind of trees at Bangalore when we have 2,500 tree species to choose from. So I can only smile at them. I cannot really say anything more.
Thank you. So moving on, We have a comment here from Sujit Patwardhan, who is the founder of the organization Parisar in Pune, and he has worked a lot on sustainable urban transport, trying to popularize pedestrianism and cycling, and they have done a lot of work. Sujit, it will be great to hear from you. So please share your thoughts on whatever you shared here. You have to unmute.
Okay. Yes, in this discussion, there were a lot of comments about whether we have the money to do certain things, and whether if the trees are coming in the way of arteries, which are the roads, they need to be removed because they are posing a problem. And I think Pradeep has actually really put his finger on the main point, which is that we need to plan with a certain vision. And the example of Delhi, which he gave, is absolutely true. Delhi has got more cars than all other metros put together, and it's still continuing to being relying more and more on cars and personal vehicles. So I think there is no point in saying that the roads are needed for more and more cars, because the more number of roads you build, more cars are encouraged. I mean, if you build roads for cars, cars will come. If you build roads for cycles, there'll be more cycling. If you build better pavements, more people will walk. This is the example of many cities in the world which have switched over from non-sustainable to sustainable transportation. And the example of most of our cities is that whenever there is a congestion, wherever there are traffic jams, the first thing that is done by the local authorities or the government is to either widen the road or to build a flyover. So who is it for? Is it for the person who walks? Is it for the person who cycles? Is it for the public transport? Because you can't have a bus stop on top of a flyover. It is only for the personal vehicle wala, who's the car or the two-wheeler, because they either call the shots, or the planners themselves can't think beyond personal vehicles. And unless we change that priority, the pyramid needs to be turned on its head, that the topmost, instead of belonging to the car, should be the pedestrian. Next should be the cyclist, because of the safety reasons, and also because cyclist doesn't pollute, doesn't consume fuel, and is able to cycle, giving himself or herself a much better health. We are not doing that. We are in fact marginalizing pedestrians and cyclists and giving all the priority to cars. In Pune, they are building multi-story flyovers. That's one story is not enough, the second story is needed. And this is the experience all over the world, which is why cities which have paused and looked at what's happening to their city and the utter destruction and mess in which they are landing the cities, have decided that we need to control this monster of a personal vehicle. And in Seoul, I'm not even talking about Europe and America, but a country which is in the Southeast Asia, in Korea, Seoul has demolished its flyover completely and turned it into public space, because there was a river underneath and a flyover on top. They have totally demolished the flyover and turned the place into people's open spaces. In the evenings, it's frequented by thousands of people. There's running water, and in our tropical countries, we all know what the importance of being near water is. So I think unless we look at this phenomena of what's happening to our cities because of the insistence that all the priorities need to be given to personal vehicles, we are going to end up in a situation where we are neither going to be financially able to keep a city from bankruptcy, nor are we going to be able to give it a healthy quality of life. And the result will only be that it will become from one chaos to another chaos. So I think if you want to look at solutions, the solutions have to be seen in people who are actually prioritizing walking, cycling, and public transport. And personal vehicles are being discouraged at every point. Parking is very expensive. There are no car areas. There are permits for cars to enter certain areas. And to those who say that in Make in India, we have to make the cars because that's how our economic progress will take place. I would like to just give an example of Japan, because today the biggest automaker in the world is not General Motors but Toyota, which manufactures the maximum number of cars. And you know how big Japan is. What it is doing is manufacturing cars and exporting it. They're not using them in their big cities to an extent that cars will take over. They've got very good public transport, they've got very good cycling, and they are discouraging cars by charging very heavy parking fees and other, congestion charge in London, cycling, city cycling, like Velib in Paris. And especially after the COVID, most of these cities are now looking at a scenario where they want to now restrict further the use of personal vehicles. So I think unless we look at this direction of change in mobility, we are not going to get out of this problem. And we'll keep, blaming each other or blaming the reality and saying nothing can be done, throw up our hands and say it's a bad thing that trees are to be cut, but there's no choice. So we must cut them. It is not true. You don't need to cut a single tree. Let the road be narrow. Let the cars go slow. Doesn't matter, because anyway we want to discourage them. We want to encourage those who walk and who cycle and who are in public transport. Thank you.
Thank you, Sujit. So moving on, there are some interesting comments from Swaminathan, where in one he says the problem is not urban planning, but the development paradigm that we have chosen to follow. And cities are born as a result of concentration of wealth and power, and the solution is in decentralization and not in more centralization. But what is happening currently, especially what the pandemic has taught us, is something very different. And I don't know if business can go on as usual. But while we are in a lockdown, while we are trying to go, cope with all the changes and the new normal around us, we also know that some of the crucial laws are being amended. For example, the labor laws were amended, and now the EIA is being amended. And this afternoon, a colleague of mine did say that this means that more dirty industries are going to come to India. So definitely, as more automobiles, more all kinds of industries will be shifted from China to India. And where are we headed next? So in this context, I would request Pradeep to share his thoughts of what will happen to all the greenery around in our cities and also everywhere around.
Pradeep has gone, I think.
Oh.
He left a message.
Okay. Yeah. Suprabha, would you like to take that?
Hi, Bhargavi. Could you just repeat that, because there was a little bit of a gap.
Yeah. No. So Swaminathan has shared some comments, and in one of the comments he speaks about the development paradigm that we have chosen, and how we need to decentralize everything. But in the current context, where we see labor laws are amended, the EIA is being amended, and we know that more dirty industries are going to come to India. So in that context, how or where do we see greening of cities and using public transport, and what does the future look like?
What a question, because it's pretty clear the writing is on the wall, that the development paradigm is not only anti-nature, but it's anti-human beings. So I think what ESG has done, or people like Pradeep and others who have really defended trees in the city and been voices for nature and for human culture within the city, I don't see beyond that, because like something like 1,500 cars are added per day into Bangalore, vehicles, motorized vehicles. That's a absurd and totally unsustainable thing. So what is the aspiration of these people? And who is when you say we for the development paradigm, I mean, I don't subscribe to it at all. So who is the we? Who is actually pushing this on people? Is it actually being asked for? Is it a demand that this is the way to go? So, I don't know that one can answer this question because I don't identify with the we in that question.
Yeah. Thank you so much for those thoughts, and maybe Brijesh could also share his closing thoughts on that.
This appears to be more of an answer than question, but I am still a part of the government, so it will not be fair on my part to share my thoughts with it, because I have to abide by certain rules, and I would like to stick to it. But then this appears to be more of an answer than the question. I leave at that.
Thank you. So, Vanaja ಅವರೇ ನೀವೇನಾರ ಹೇಳಕ್ ಆಸೆ ಪಡ್ತೀರಾ ನಮ್ಮ ಪಾರ್ಟಿಸಿಪೆಂಟ್ಸ್ಗೆ?
ತುಂಬಾ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ನಡೆಸ್ಕೊಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀರಾ, ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಸೇರಿ, ಎಲ್ಲಾ ದೇಶದವರು ಸೇರಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರನ್ನ ಇಂಪ್ರೂವ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು, ಮತ್ತೆ ಹಸಿರು ಉಸಿರು ಅನ್ನೋದು ನಾವು ಉಳಿಸ್ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀರಾ. ತುಂಬಾ ಸಂತೋಷ ಮೇಡಮ್. ನಮ್ಮ ಬೀದಿ ವ್ಯಾಪಾರದವ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ತುಂಬಾ ಕಾಳಜಿ ತಗೊಂಡು ನಮ್ಮ ಬಡವ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನೀವು ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರೋದು ಪ್ರೋಗ್ರಾಮ್ ನಮ್ಗೆ ತುಂಬಾ ಇಷ್ಟ ಆಯ್ತು.
ತುಂಬಾ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು. So Vanaja also shares that it's very nice that we've all come together for a conversation like this, and it's so important to highlight issues of the street vendors and the importance of having greenery all around. So it's really nice to have had her on this panel. And she has had to come taking public transport to the office to be able to access this technology without the noise of the traffic behind her. So tumba thanks, Vanaja avare, tumba dhanyavadagalu nam kadeyinda. So with that, I think it has been a very interesting discussion. Hello?
I didn't get my answer. What about arranging pets only in Brigade Road and Commercial Street and such other places?
Mr. Vasant, I think we will talk to Mr. Brijesh and others in a different forum on that, because it's time up, and
great.
we've had a good session with so many participants joining us from across the world as well. I'm very sorry that Cyprian had to leave. And Pradeep has also just left.
I'm fine, no problem.
But thank you everyone, and this has been a very interesting conversation, because it threw open some of the issues that we've all been working on, we've been debating on, and it again comes to the point that we all still need to do a lot of work to make sure that public transport dominates our cities, and we all take buses to wherever we are going. We also ensure that there are safe spaces for pedestrians to walk, for cyclists, and also for the livelihoods like the street vendors and others, which add to the vibrancy of our cities. So with those closing thoughts, I would request Leo to share his thoughts, and then we can call it a day.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bhargavi, for an excellent moderation of a very complex theme, bringing trees, health, and functionality of urban areas together is not easy. And I think as we all grappled with the contours of a tree's buttress roots, as it dug out pipelines and threw out most of the lanes that were marked exclusively for cars, I think the tree also has a message that it could perhaps want more space in our planning. Because I guess the idea is to not adjust a tree, but to accommodate a tree. And when I say in that sense, it's more figurative, and the purpose really is to try and organize our minds in a way that we can make cities livable, not build cities for the sake of financializing it and profiting from the city, but to actually understand that when a majority of humans are now becoming urbanized, the pandemic has taught us that if you don't make space for greenery, you're also not making space for humans to live. It's not just about it, even from a very self-centered perspective. I think we need to take a real hard look at how we are not just devegetating our cities, but also destroying the quality of health of people within those densely populated urban areas. I mean, of course, we know that in Dharavi they managed to beat it because of what we call herd immunity, but the pandemic is only one part of the problem. But overall, I think in Bangalore, if you take the one of the single largest contributing factors of breaking down people's health, it is stress. And stress essentially largely because people are spending too much time commuting and too little time relaxing and enjoying life. So people are buying up properties which they can't even enjoy. And there are on the other end people who just cannot imagine buying up properties because the city has become so expensive. So it's really a very difficult problem to address, but we must. And as we imagine a city where one can walk, one can cycle, and one can work with a street vendor and chat with Vanaja and Gandhi Bazaar, at the same time sip a coffee or just pick up leaves like you did in your childhood. Now that's the kind of imagination which actually can tackle the type of sterility which is being planned across not just Bangalore but many other cities. So I think this conflict is good. That conflict can bring out some very healthy results. And if there was no conflict, we might just assume that everything is okay. So it's good that we know it is not okay for us to be this way. And this is the type of conversation we will continue in the coming weeks. Our next webinar in the series, Better Bus Bangalore, which is in coordination with Bengaluru Moving Campaign, will be coming Friday in 4-5 days' time. It will be at the same time. We'll have a different theme, and please leave your email addresses so that we can send you the invitation to social media at esgindia.org. And we will invite you again to build on these excellent conversations that we have. So in all these 5 sessions, what we're trying to do is build a body of understanding, build an imaginary of not just the city of Bengaluru, but of cities in general, so that we don't have to sit like this in webinars and look back and say how beautiful it was and how terrible it is now. Let's make it beautiful again, and let's make it healthy as well. Thank you very much for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank all the speakers.
Thank you.
I had to leave. Mr. Brijesh, Suprabha.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks for being with us despite being in the government. Usually government people hesitate to participate. You are one of the rare exceptions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, dear.
Thank you, Vanaja. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Ali.